It pains me to do this, okay? I am not a pro police individual. I have been very vocal about the militarization and the violence perpetrated by police, wrongful shootings. I've made videos about police shootings and whatnot before. I'm not pro police. Therefore, it really kind of pains me to have to repeatedly speak out against Black Lives Matter. I would like to be on their side, but I can't. Because of what they do, because of how the leftist media portrays them. I would like to say liberal media, but as a liberal, I have to say that there isn't a liberal media right now, because if there's a media that counteracts conservative media, it would be the progressive media. And progressives aren't liberals. This is another thing I've had to talk about very frequently online. Progressives aren't liberals, they're radical leftists. And if liberals are synonymous with progressives, then we don't have a word currently for not psychopathic, crazy leftists. Okay? But that's neither here nor there. I don't want to waste too much time laying out this subject. We're going to talk about what happened in Minneapolis this week. There was a shooting involving a Black Lives Matter protest. Now, it wasn't, at least as far as we know, not particularly Black Lives Matter protesters doing the shooting. However, if we listen to the quote unquote bunny ears, what we have no proof, liberal media, what the liberal, huge fucking bunny ears media is saying is that some white supremacists shot up this meeting. Eyewitness reports state that a white guy, an unidentified guy of who knows what the fuck race he is, and an Asian guy, all of who were disguised and wearing masks, as were many Black Lives Matter protesters. These three people who were wearing, holding a Black Lives Matter sign, whether or not that makes them Black Lives Matter protesters, who knows, were accosted by Black Lives Matter protesters. Apparently, something they did that is unclear at this point made them draw the attention of other people in the protest, who told them to remove their masks. These three quote unquote huge bunny ears, quote, 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 so people say white supremacists were masked. What we have that's evidence for this event is statements given by other masked people. It's understandable that protesters would be disguised in order to try to protect their identity. I understand that. But we have no fucking reason to believe these people are white supremacists or Black Lives Matter protesters or anything else. They were just masked people among, well, other masked people. But they did something to draw attention to themselves, which drew the attention of other protesters. And here we begin what happened. Now, what the liberal media would have you believe, which I would contend is the progressive media, because what liberal would accept this kind of bullshit that is counteracted by the slightest amount of scrutiny and research, I couldn't explain to you. But we have eyewitness reports. We have no video because we'll get into that in a second. But what happened was several other protesters came at these, protesters, because they had a sign that was pro-Black Lives Matter, told them to remove their masks, and they refused and tried to leave. Now here's where actually shit happens in this shooting. As they try to leave, they are followed by the people of the protest that are telling them to identify themselves. And they continue to try to get away. Now, quickly, this, whatever happened, moves beyond any cameras. There is some amount of eyewitness testimony that would lead us to believe that this altercation, whatever it was deliberately moved beyond cameras. Whether or not this is true, that it was a deliberate attempt to move this altercation away from anybody who could record it, I don't know if that's deliberate or not. So you can believe whatever you want to believe. We don't have any good evidence one way or the other. But what we do have is eyewitness testimony telling that at this point, the three individuals who were being accosted or being threatened by a lot more than three other protesters were physically attacked. Now, what eyewitness testimony states further than this is that they further tried to disengage and that they reached for weapons and were still continuously attacked. And then after this, a shooting happened in which 5 people were injured. Now, according to the quote-unquote liberal media, again, extensive bunny ears, this was a shooting perpetrated by 3 white supremacists towards Black Lives Matter. Do we have any confirmation, any anecdotal evidence, any however scant evidence whatsoever that this shooting was perpetrated by white supremacists? No! We have no fucking evidence that's true. That's made the fuck up. Do we have any evidence that this was perpetrated by counter-protesters or people who didn't agree with Black Lives Matter? Not really. However, it is somewhat reasonable, given what little evidence we have, to suspect that whatever drew attention to these 3 individuals was perhaps that they weren't a member of the protest, that they were, due to the fact that they were recording other protesters and whatnot, that maybe that they were incognito, that they were not protesters, and that they were attempting to document the protest. Is this a crime? No. Is this evidence of white supremacy? No. Is this evidence of anything other than perhaps the weakest evidence that these weren't people with actual pro-Black Lives Matter bent? Maybe. That, I believe, is the only reasonable observation to make on whether or not these unidentified 3 people were white supremacists or were Black Lives Matter or not. The answer is maybe they weren't Black Lives Matter, and that there's no evidence to suggest that they were white supremacists. None. Eyewitnesses, however much you want to take eyewitness testimony into account, state that these 3 people were physically attacked before the shooting occurred. And then the facts we do know is that these 3 people, whoever the fuck they were, shot 5 people. But what little evidence we have is that they were attacked and chased from where they were by a fucking mob. Now, if somebody, quote, punches you, the eyewitness testimony states that these people were physically attacked, not just pushed or shoved or intimidated into moving. They were intimidated into moving and then physically attacked. And then they pulled weapons since they were hugely fucking outnumbered and then fired. We've had plenty of evidence over the past month to show that Black Lives Matter protesters have a habit of getting physical with both the media and anyone who's not part of their in-group. Now, I'm not trying to say that Black Lives Matter gets physical with people as a matter of course. These are isolated incidents. But this keeps happening and has become commonplace. I'm not trying to say that this shooting should have happened, but what little information we have says that there was physical interaction between Black Lives Matter protesters and these three mystery individuals before the shooting, including, quote, punching, which is direct physical violence of not the pushing, not the shoving, not the we're walking towards you, bro, fucking bullshit, but like they were physically attacked and were defending themselves, which is legal. Because if somebody physically attacks you, you can fight back. I want to be on Black Lives Matter's side. If there's a political, socioeconomic, whatever issue that you could accuse me of having bias on, I don't like cops. I don't trust cops. My default stance before I start looking into issues of police brutality is to distrust cops. Okay? But no matter the validity of Black Lives Matter in terms of protesting against police brutality, we're talking about a group, Black Lives Matter, that repeatedly gets in trouble for terrorizing the public, for attacking innocent people with physical violence, for introducing a mob rule mentality. And what we see of these kinds of protests that ends up on camera is violent. And what we see in terms of like chants and slogans from Black Lives Matter are violent in nature. As somebody who is going to say this, regardless of what you think, is not racist, as somebody who's sympathetic towards any protesters of police brutality, who wants to be on Black Lives Matter's side since they have such a slice of the media's spotlight and are talking about an issue, police brutality, that I personally care about a lot. I want to be on their side. And yet they keep making a complete fucking ass of themselves in the media. And even when it's not covered at small scales, they're making an ass of themselves. It seems that, and you can take this or leave this because it's only what I've seen, and I'm not like actively researching this in a scientific manner, as somebody who's paying at least some minor attention to this issue, and everything I hear paints Black Lives Matter in an extremely poor light that shows Black Lives Matter at every turn, at every example, to be racist, disorganized, and violent. I'm talking about a movement. I'm not talking about a race. I disagree with racializing the issue of police brutality because police brutality is not a racial issue. The heavily militarized and poorly regulated police force of the entire country perpetrates across the country repeated instances of brutality against people of completely different races. This is not something that only happens to black people. In fact, it happens extremely frequently to white people. And if you're wondering why you haven't heard about it, it's because Black Lives Matter is what sells. And the media is only going to talk to you about what you want to hear. And what you want to hear is what sells. Do you understand? I've talked at length about instances of extreme police brutality that really didn't make the national media because the victim was white. The perception of the extreme raciality, to have to invent a word at lack of one that's a real word, of this issue is because of the media, the irresponsible media, who understands the progressive uproar about what has happened. Have the police horribly mistreated and murdered and fucking gone against all logic and conception of what justifiable force is against black people? Yes. Have they only done it to black people? No. This is not a racial issue. It's not. And if you say to me, it disproportionately affects black people, that may very well be true, and that doesn't change the fact of what I said. This is not a racial issue. This happens to everybody. And I'm sick of having to deal with the racialization and the progressive stackness of this fucking issue. And when we get to the point of assumed counter-protesters who are documenting Black Lives Matter protesters who are violently attacked and then shoot in self-defense, and the media outright on the basis of zero fucking goose egg evidence lies and says they were white supremacists with zero fucking evidence. None. You can't show me the evidence because there is none. Says they're white supremacists. Just to drum up your fucking attention. Then what am I to do as an honest person, as a logical person, as a rational person, as a pragmatic person who cares about this issue and sees people lying about it? What am I to do but to tell you the fucking truth? What evidence we have, which may or may not be true, I admit, because I am fucking honest. Unlike Black Lives Matter, unlike fucking crazy fucking progressive activists, and unlike the fucking entirety of the left-wing media, I am honest, and I'm saying what evidence there is in this issue does not suggest white supremacists opened fire on a peaceful protest. What the evidence that we have at this moment suggests is that 3 people who are probably unaffiliated with the movement were accosted by protesters in the specific city of Minneapolis, Minnesota. They were physically attacked and assaulted and fired firearms towards their attackers in self-defense. When I hear white supremacists open fire on Black Lives Matter protests, I know that that's bullshit! It's a lie! And I'm offended when I'm lied to, especially about something as serious and as controversial as this issue. Thanks for watching.